G'day folks, ZD here with some quick tricks for farming the Trial of Sekhemas. If you need to ascend or you want more fundamental strategy, then check out my full Sekhemas Ascendancy guide in the description. And don't make any Sekhema puns in the comments, please. The first category is stuff to make your runs faster and easier. You don't have to click the first death crystals. In Escape Trials, you can just run past that first one and it automatically activates, giving you a little bit of a head start, but honestly, it's less about the time save and more about not having to click it. Similarly, you don't have to click the chalices either, just go kill the rare monsters. It shows you where they are, but that's not really something you need to know. The rooms are really simple. Now you can dodge through most traps in the Trial of Sekhemas. Most people will know that, I think, but dodge roll has a pretty long damage immunity phase, and you can get through most traps quickly by really abusing that fact. But where it really shines is when you take advantage of dodge roll distance relics. If you get a single relic with increased dodge roll distance, it can make a huge difference. 0.5 extra distance might seem kind of small, but it lets you cheat a lot of things in the trials, and it essentially extends your immunity frames. So you can do things like dodge roll through the middle of flamethrower traps. Notice how your character just automatically wiggles around the pole. You can just roughly aim for the middle, and you can get through it very quick and safe in a lot of the different layouts. You can dodge roll over the fire mines with about 0.5 additional dodge roll distance. It depends a little bit on your movement speed. It isn't safe to do this with normal move speed and dodge roll distance, but with some relic upgrades, you can skip right over these fire mines, which speeds up the second floor gauntlets a lot. The safest way is to just barely trigger them and then dodge roll away. And that's the last dodge roll tip, is just that higher movement speed also makes dodge roll better. So get those 35% movement speed boots and whack on a couple move speed relics. It really makes a big difference. But you do want to practice and get a feel for what you can get away with each different setup, because at each different speed and dodge roll distance, what you can kind of cheat is a little bit different and the timings are a little bit different. So it just takes a little bit of practice with each new setup. But the more you get of each, the faster and lazier you can be in the Trial of Sekhemas. Next up, ritual rooms are the fastest rooms by far, but don't overlook how good Chalice and Hourglass trials can actually be. They each give quite a few rare monster kills, and that gets you more sacred water, more keys, more relic drops, and more loot overall. And the Hourglass trial only actually takes 40 seconds, despite what the timer initially says, if you blast the rare monsters, which each kill shaves some time off the clock, so they end up being pretty quick, comparable to some of the larger ritual rooms at least. And now for some boss tips. The bosses exploding when they die on the first and second floor don't actually hurt you. So this is Rattlecage and the twins. So just feel free to stand and wait for the loot. Besides, it makes you look really cool. You can stand on the edge of the trap platforms to stop Ashar from diving. Positioning correctly stops her right away, and it doesn't actually set off the trap. You can just stand on that little stone bit. This also helps speed up the fight too, so she won't spend a long time in that jumping phase, which she does if you just run around. And that way you don't have to activate the traps, which the dart traps can actually hurt you quite a bit. Just be careful not to do it right as she actually does a dive, because she can still hit you with a slam. She just won't start a new slam if you're anywhere on the platform. For Zarokh's lightning spin, standing in corners avoids the majority of the damage. It used to avoid all of the damage, but they nerfed it a little bit to hit you occasionally in a recent patch. But it still does barely anything if you stand here, and it's the kind of safest, easiest route. Duck in to deal damage after each spin, or if you're ranged, you can just stand there and shoot from the corner. You can dodge roll through Zarokh's flying explosive rods. They explode, but they don't actually deal any honor damage if you do this. This is even easier if you have higher movement speed and extended dodge roll range. And now for some tips around Afflictions and Boons. The physical damage afflictions / the pledges are nearly free when you have good honor resistance, especially if you also have any armor. Taking 1000 physical damage in 8 rooms from the pledge to Kochai, for example, sounds really bad, but then you realize that you'll actually only take about 250 damage at the honor resistance cap, and it's not so bad, especially because you're getting like 3 boons or removing 3 afflictions for that trade-off. The afflictions that have you take a bit over 100 damage per room as well only end up being like 30 damage, which is often countered by the random healing boons that you'll pick up as well. The All-Seeing Eye major boon counters all of the smoke afflictions that prevent you from seeing various room details, so feel free to just grab any of those afflictions when they come up if you have that major boon. You don't see many major boons until you start stacking the relics that give increased options at shops, but once you'll do, you actually start seeing a lot of major boons. It's not unusual to have like 4 or 5 in a run. So knowing some of those clever tricks you can do with some of those major boons is really good. The lose all water on floor completion affliction triggers when you kill the boss, unfortunately, but before you can visit the merchant. This makes it quite bad unless you can visit a merchant just before the end of each floor, which is pretty unreliable. It doesn't happen a lot of the time. You do get some water from boss kills, but it's barely enough for one boon a lot of the time, so it's a good idea to avoid this affliction except maybe on the final floor. And even then you're trading off potential keys. The various things that affect monster water drop also affect bosses. So that's things like monsters drop less water, or monsters don't drop a water afflictions, or the pledges that boost them, and even the relic effects as well. If you're only thinking about the water that drops from actual monster kills itself, it doesn't seem like these things would be very impactful, but when you consider you get a couple hundred from the bosses, then it starts to add up a bit more. Make sure you don't unlock the door before buying boons from Balbalha. Once you unlock the door, buying is disabled. The third floor, where she's standing right next to the door, gets me sometimes, and it's very upsetting. The last tip for afflictions and boons is you can just walk away. This goes for a few different things, but it's especially true for the pledge to Kochai, which can be very good, but it often just has some bad options like random afflictions, and it's never really worth doing the random afflictions. Sometimes it's better to just say no and leave. Now some tips for improving your profit when you're farming the Trial of Sekhemas, or even just to grab a bit extra while you're ascending. So firstly, you can leave and return as needed to make trades. You don't need to put yourself on D&D. It can be a little bit annoying, but you can leave, vendor, stash things, etc., and then return to where you left off. It's just a good idea to make sure that if you just finished a room, make sure you get the room reward before, because you might end up missing out on the reward if you forget to click it before you leave. The most valuable relics for trading currently are 8% or more movement speed seals and urns, 50% or higher defenses seals and urns, because that boosts energy shield, which is very popular right now. High relic drop chance with good second affixes. That's a very good farming strategy for farming the valuable relics from the bosses. 2 or 3 additional merchant choices, amphoras or tapestries are pretty valuable. Merchant cost reduction as well with a good second affix, but really the merchant choices and the cost reduction together are some of the most valuable normal relics that you can get. Easily several divines if they're rolled well. And finally, any relics with near maximum roll honor resistances, whether they're the smaller ones or the medium-sized ones, as long as they have a somewhat decent good second stat, can be quite valuable. You can basically skip the large relics, the incense, coffer, and vases. In over 11 runs that I tested, I didn't find a single one worth selling for even like 10 exalts. I just couldn't sell any. The mods are kind of mediocre and niche. In theory, some of them are good if you high roll them, but because they're so large, they kind of muscle out other ones that are just a bit more impactful, like the vendor modifiers. You really need like double max rolls for them to be worth anything, and even then it can still be kind of hard to sell them, so it's a pretty safe one to just skip. You can 3-to-1 Bad Relics and Jewels of the same type at the reforging bench. It's a little bit time consuming, but I have found it to be worth it overall. It's a good idea to do them in bulk rather than, you know, having to make repeated trips to there after every run. Chuck all your relics and jewels that aren't immediately good in a big stash tab and do them all at once. Now the good caches, the shiny chests, are, in rough order, Spectrum is the best, but they are very rare, and these ones drop the Grand Spectrums. They're possibly something like a 10% spawn rate, like you might see 1 in every 10 runs. Although I've just done a string of 11 and haven't seen one yet, so that can happen. The Time Lost caches, which are moderately rare, drop the Time Lost jewels, obviously. And these are pretty good earners, definitely worth going for over pretty much anything else, except the Spectrum ones. And I actually think that the value of these Time Lost jewels will potentially improve more in the future once more people realize they're available and learn how to search for them, because it's a little bit tricky to do. It also makes them tricky to price, but you can always put them in like a one divine dump tab and see if you get messaged. The Royal caches are one of the ones you'll be hitting the most often. These drop the regular jewels. The quality of the cache doesn't actually matter that much, as the lower ones can drop magic jewels, which are very valuable for Adorned builds potentially. The Arcanist caches for currency drops is pretty self-explanatory, though a lot of the time you'll just get transmutes and augments, but it's good to roll the dice. Then if you don't have many other choices, your small or medium relic caches are good, because those are the ones that can be a bit more valuable, anywhere from like 10-20x to a couple of divines if you're lucky. And then if I have no other choices, I typically get the mysterious ones, which are kind of like a mediocre gamble because they can kind of drop anything, and occasionally I get like a good relic or an extra jewel or something from them. I'll do that before picking any of the like prime chest armors or anything like that. As a special aside though, for the regular gear types, which are usually your last choices, there is one exception: the amulet caches. If you get those, They're very rare, but amulets can be quite valuable, particularly if you manage to get some uncrafted white normal attribute amulets, since those can be very valuable for chance orbing. And make sure when you're doing runs to check the golden cache trial rooms when you get the opportunity if you have a spare golden key. These seem to have a higher than average chance of being the better caches. It's pretty hard to test that in significant amounts, but a lot of reports are suggesting that. And the gold chests are where you're going to find the biggest stuff, so you're potentially going to get an extra spectrum every now and then if you're checking those rooms regularly. And then one last pro tip, I did touch on it a little bit, but do remember to check good magic jewels for adorned builds. So the adorned makes it so that magic jewels can be way more valuable than rare jewels if they have certain affixes with very good rolls because of the way that they scale. It's worth price checking anything that looks like a nice high double roll affix or looks like a particularly valuable affix, just because if you see it's a magic and it's actually worth quite a bit, then it might be worth more unregaled than actually regaled. A good example is the increased bonuses from quivers. That can be valuable even by itself, but if you get a second good modifier, then it can be crazy. People will vial these and use these blue for their adorned builds, and those people have lots of money. So that's it for this set of quick tips. I hope there was a few in there that you didn't know. It's not a format I've done too much, but I kind of like it as a way to just get some value out of the notes that I've taken, to share some of those with you in a nice digestible format. Let me know what you think. That said, I'm not done covering the Trial of Sekhemas, so do keep an eye out for more content on that in the future, including potentially a farming strategies and profit testing video. Make sure to check the description for links to other useful PoE2 guides as well, and if you have any tips that I missed, share them in the comments. That'd be awesome. That's it for now though. I'm Ziggy D, and thanks for watching.